Yesterday marked an extraordinary day in the war as the Wagner group marched on Moscow in what Putin calls an act of mutiny. Joining me today to discuss these events is Dr. Marina Miron, a military ethics expert from King's College London. What exactly has happened in the last 24 hours in Moscow?
That is a very good question, because we all were trying to understand. On Friday evening, Prigozhin claimed that Russian forces had attacked him, and by the morning we started hearing that he took Rostov-on-Don, and there is the command center for the Southern Military District, and apparently he was calling for justice for the armed forces of Russia, and he was marching towards Moscow to clarify things with the Ministry of Defense. So he wasn't declaring a rebellion, he wasn't saying that he's gonna depose Putin. He was more interested in the Ministry of Defense and clarifying things, and he said, you know, if we are being attacked by the Russian armed forces, we will shoot back. And so this is what was happening. It was like the whole day we were looking at his march towards Moscow, not knowing what to think, and many thought, oh, maybe there will be a coup, or, you know, the power over Wagner has waned and Putin cannot do anything. And so there were a lot of theories of what was going on. And then in the afternoon, allegedly Lukashenko, who is the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, spoke to the Wagner chief, to Prigozhin. He claimed he had known Prigozhin for over 20 years now, and so he wanted to mediate. And after his conversation with Prigozhin, which must have been very convincing, Prigozhin said, we're turning around, we're returning to our camps, and called it off completely without giving a plausible explanation apart from the fact that he didn't want the bloodshed. The problem came to light when Wagner started operating in Ukraine, and first it was not much. They remained in shadows, and the first kind of appearances of Prigozhin came last year when the Russians entered the operational pause, and it was every appearance his language became more and more harsh. When talking about the performance of the Russian forces on the ground, about how the top brass doesn't deserve to be in those positions. So he was criticizing the special military operation. He was also the one who was backing the appointment of General Surovikin back in October. And so his ambitions changed, and he wanted a greater involvement in how the military is being run. Not necessarily a political role, but he wanted a seat at the table, possibly replacing Shoigu, in order to mold the armed forces into something according to his vision, and how he was running his own business, how he was running his Wagner group. And that didn't resonate well, but Putin remained silent, and he didn't want to enter kind of into this fight between the MOD and Prigozhin. And we know that Prigozhin is very capable when it comes to theatrical appearances. Sometimes he is very calm, writes calm letters, and sometimes he's all emotional, screaming obscenities. And so he kind of attracted a lot of media attention through kind of his art. But what we have seen over the past year, and especially if we remember the issue with the ammunition, is that Prigozhin first said, the MOD is not giving us ammunition, we're withdrawing from Bakhmut, when it was about to be taken by Wagner. And then the next day, he reversed the course completely. And so one day, all the news outlets were covering, oh my gosh, Wagner is leaving Bakhmut, how the Russians will lose Bakhmut, and so this is the end of it. And next day he says, oh, well, we're staying. We solved the issue internally. And that kind of showed to me that he wanted kind of more attention, more popularity. And whatever he said, some of the things he said, certainly about the corruption in the military and all those things, they're certainly true. However, he's one of them, and he's, you know, I'm not sure how he would offer any different kind of leadership, maybe much harsher leadership, but he still is a part of that system. And so when it came to this confrontation, when the escalation of the confrontation with the Ministry of Defense, the background to that is Wagner now withdrew to Russia after taking Bakhmut, so he transferred control to the Russian forces there. He withdrew and he was waiting to return to Ukraine with new tasks, because his existence also depends on financing from the Kremlin. So he needs to remain active, to remain in business. Now, the problem is that the Minister of Defense, Shoigu, said whatever private military companies, which are legally not allowed in Russia, they're banned in Russia legally, and they turn a blind eye to Wagner and all these other guys like Kadyrov, and also like some oligarchs have their own private military companies, which we don't see mentioned. And so Shoigu said, why don't you need to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense from 1st of July. And I think that was kind of the turning point where Wagner said, I'm not going to have Shoigu dictate how I have to run my business. Because the other groups, they did agree to those conditions in order to operate in the same structure, in the same command structure as the armed forces. And Wagner wanted to remain separate from that because he knew better how to command his guys. He didn't want to take any orders from corrupt generals who don't, according to him, who don't deserve to be in the position that they are in. And I think that was why he actually kind of tried to use show of force. I don't think he seriously wanted any armed clashes. I think it was more of kind of a demonstration rather than anything else, rather than a rebellion, rather than a coup, because in terms of numbers and preparation, if we're talking about an insurgency, right, it takes years, and I mean like decades to evolve. It starts as a grassroots movement, and then you build up your military capabilities. Okay, Wagner had it to a certain extent, but you also build up your logistics, you also have some sort of external support, and you have a grievance that you can address and that you can remedy. And now he was addressing the grievance that the armed forces, the soldiers are being mistreated and so on. The problem is, if you leave Wagner, you get shot in the head. So his system is not exactly a very viable alternative because he's very harsh, and so somebody who is in the military, who's serving Russia, who thinks that he's doing a service to his fatherland, is not probably going to join Wagner, knowing the consequences and knowing that you're just choosing between two evils. Either you're under that evil command or under that evil command. So this message didn't really resonate that much, or as much as he thought that it would resonate amongst the armed forces. General Surovikin, whom he backed back in October, also came out and said that, he should lay down his arms, everything should be resolved, and he should stop it. And so I think during this march, somewhere this realization came that really, what is he going to do when he reaches Moscow? Realistically, he has 25,000. He doesn't have any air capabilities. He was complaining about lack of ammunition. I mean, who's supplying the ammunition? Who's going to supply the ammunition to Wagner? He doesn't have logistics.
Since the Wagner group has pulled out of Moscow, it's unclear what the group's next move will be.
So right now, as it stands, they're withdrawing to Belarus, where Lukashenko might be keeping a close eye on what they're doing. One version of this event, was it staged? Was it a maskirovka to distract the public, to have this media storm for one day? And with every single time when Prigozhin spoke, that's kind of the question I was asking myself: is it a part of their information war, where they're kind of trying to insinuate that there is this crack within the Russian system in order to make the rest underestimate Russia? So if that's the case, which, I wouldn't exclude anything at this stage. How high the probabilities, I don't know. If that's the case, and Wagner will obviously, Prigozhin wouldn't be punished, and he will be repurposed probably to use his troops, because he's now very close to the other side of Ukraine, being in Belarus, to basically disrupt or distract the Ukrainian troops. Even if it wasn't some sort of Maskirovka, even then, I think Putin will have to look for a viable replacement for Prigozhin, and it's very difficult because Putin doesn't trust anybody. That little degree of trust. So to find somebody who has the quality of leading those troops and somebody whom Putin can more or less trust with certain tasks will be very difficult. So until then, he might need Prigozhin to stay put, to stay in his role, because as I said, it would be easier just to maybe send them to Ukraine and say, okay, you don't need to sign anything, go to Ukraine, and then all these 25,000, including Prigozhin himself, will be killed during the counteroffensive, and that problem would resolve itself for Putin. So there is that possibility that he might say, we actually need your services, go to Ukraine, this is your new task, and, to keep them busy. And also, if this kind of mutiny was real, if they're busy on the battlefield, they're not going to plan any actions against Russia. So that might be kind of another scenario where Putin will still use them with more caution, just to have them all eliminated there by the Ukrainian forces, because they've always been expendable to him. He never really cared about the death that the Wagner group suffers. So I think those are kind of the possibilities to still kind of use them somehow, either in their unofficial capacity, or he will try to make those fighters join the Ministry of Defense or sign the contract with the Ministry of Defense and still deploy them to Ukraine, just to make sure that Prigozhin doesn't have command of that amount of manpower, and maybe send Prigozhin to Africa to sort the things there and have him far away from Russia.
So where does this leave Vladimir Putin? Has he appeared weak in all of this?
Well, I don't think, contrary to what many have said, I don't think that it weakened Putin in any way. I think it has shown that Putin has more power than Prigozhin estimated. And even somebody like Prigozhin, who has the courage to face Putin, caves. And I think that, after that, I don't think that many of Wagner's troops, they must have been disappointed, because there is this Prigozhin saying, I'm marching for our cause. And then it takes one phone call, or whatever has been said in that phone call, and he caves. So he's not a martyr. He is just a coward for them. And it shows Putin's power and Putin's ability to resolve this without having to resort to the use of force. So it shows how much leverage Putin actually has. And it's not, it's a demonstration for whoever wants to face me, who tries to threaten me. I have all the tools at my disposal, to even not needing to resort to any force to regulate the situation. And I think that Putin is coming out of this much stronger.
President Zelensky has accused Putin of hiding away from the threat, and these events could play into the hands of Ukraine as forces continue the counteroffensive.
Well, we could say that since we don't know how the Wagner group will be used, will it be used in Ukraine? So perhaps that's the only advantage, that because the Ukrainian armed forces couldn't hold Bakhmut, and Wagner claims that they retook Bakhmut. So from that perspective, not having Wagner in the game might be beneficial. However, from my perspective, Wagner is used to solve specific battlefield tasks, and those tasks are more offensive than defensive. Right now, the Russians are on the defensive, so the reasoning is the Wagner, they haven't been in Ukraine for a while now. Since they took Bakhmut, they exited Ukraine, so they returned to Russia. So whatever has happened with the counteroffensive up to this point isn't because of Wagner, it's because of the Russian forces being deployed in Ukraine now. And so it is possible that Putin will try to fill the gap when he needs to switch to more offensive actions by sending the likes of Kadyrov in place of Wagner, or to send, as I said, the Wagner troops who might sign the agreement. So either way, for the Ukrainian forces, there is no immediate advantage as of now, because those who are on the battlefield, they are not playing politics. They have orders, and they are afraid to disobey orders. That's what they're there for, and their order is to defend the territories that Russia has occupied. So I don't think, regardless of their morale and so on, I don't think that this would have any immediate effect on how the story unfolds with a counteroffensive.
What the future holds for the Wagner Group is still unclear, and the events of the last 24 hours could prove to be a pivotal moment in the war. Simon, back.
Alright, explain natin mga kaibigan ang sinabi nito. Yung Wagner Bros ay umayaw na nga sa suporta kay Putin.